Hi there, and welcome to MiWeek. Thanks so much for joining us. I'm Christy McDonald. It is not the kind of news that we like starting out with, but sadly, it's happened again. A shooting in California that has left more than a dozen people dead and just as many injured. President Obama is calling for a bipartisan effort to address mass shootings. So coming up, what is the answer to preventing tragedies such as this one? Would stricter gun control laws make a difference? We will debate all the options. Also coming up, Police Chief James Craig draws attention with his comments on why Detroit is not a prime target for terrorists. Plus, we'll look at the state of education in Michigan when I talk with the head of the Education Trust Midwest. And Michigan's best part-time job could very well be that of Wayne County Commissioner. We will talk about the real cost to the county. But we do start tonight with the story that is topping the headlines. 2 gunmen opened fire in a social services agency in San Bernardino, California, killing 14 people, wounding 17 others. President Obama says this type of gun violence has become too common in the United States, and that is where we start tonight with our contributors, Nolan Finley from the Detroit News, Stephen Henderson from the Detroit Free Press. Gentlemen, it's good to see you after the Thanksgiving holiday. But to start like this, and to start with a debate again that I feel like that we've been going round and round in this country for the last especially year or so, given the number of mass shootings we've had, is depressing again, quite honestly, Nolan.
Well, of course, but I mean, we still don't know what was going on there. I think it's, we still don't know the motive. And until you know the motive and until you know what was driving this, what was behind it, I think talking about remedies is premature. I mean, if it was terrorism, then that's a whole different aspect than if it was, for example, workplace violence. I mean, then you're dealing with a whole different set of remedies. Between the two.
I think you still also are talking about access to guns, though, in a larger scope.
That's what's common across all of the things you just talked about. Workplace violence, terrorism, all of these things depend on the easy access to weapons that we insist is part of our culture here. And at some point, I think it's worth at least a discussion about why that's true. Why do we cling to that in the face of a national crisis? This is the 355th mass shooting in the country this year. 355. I'm not sure why we think any sort of constitutional protection ought to prevent us from reassessing the impact of that on this country.
Steve, it's not like we don't have gun laws. We've got a tremendous amount of gun laws. This occurred in the state, in the country, with the tightest gun laws, and we know at least 2 of the guns that they found so far were legally purchased.
But that's an oxymoron that gets pushed by the gun lobby all the time. The idea,
it's not the gun lobby. I mean, it's California that has the toughest laws in the country, and these were legally purchased guns. Right, at least the 2 they've traced so far.
But because the laws vary from state to state, the New York Times had a wonderful graphic 2 weeks ago about where guns come from. Where do guns in California come from? They don't come from California. 90% of them come from Arizona next door, which has almost no gun laws like California. In New York, same thing. Most of the guns come from the South, from Virginia, from Alabama, from states that don't do this. This is not a state-by-state, hold on, this is not a state-by-state issue. This is a national issue. This is about how we as a country want to deal with firearms.
And we have layer after layer of federal gun laws, and the difference between what makes this difference, if it's terrorism or some other motivation. I mean, if it's terrorism, that the challenge of keeping guns out of the hand becomes so much harder, as we saw in France. France, you can't buy guns, and France has federal gun policies, but they manage to smuggle in the guns to the terrorists. That's a whole different animal.
All right, but let me ask this though. You can say what would we? You can say
355
guys, hang on. You can say what would have prevented what happened yesterday. That maybe no law in the book could have prevented what happened yesterday. But I think though you have to go beyond looking at a specific incident and look at the whole and start talking about, do we start chipping away though? That's not an excuse to then not do anything, because it wouldn't have prevented exactly
what would you do? I mean, that's what everybody says. You hear folks saying, well, common sense gun laws. There's 300 million guns in circulation in this country. You tell me what common sense gun laws would keep people from getting their hands on guns.
Well, here's a list. 1, holding gun owners responsible when their guns go missing and end up involved in a crime. That happens more often than not.
That wasn't the case in this one.
We don't know what the case was here, but most gun crimes in this country are committed with guns that were at one time bought legally. So you buy a gun,
of course.
I buy a gun, I lost it, or I sold it to my friend. It ends up in a kid's hand in Detroit doing something that he's not supposed to do. You or I should be held to some level of accountability for that. How about gun manufacturers? I mean, the idea that you can just make these things that take people's lives and there's no liability. There's no other industry that's shielded from that kind of liability. Why are they?
Every industry has that kind of liability if their product's defective. No other industry is liable for their product if it is used.
If it works the right way.
If it works the right way.
Right.
I mean, you're going to extend that to the auto industry? Somebody commits a crime with a car.
Here's another idea.
Going to be liable?
Here's another idea. Guns are protected by the Second Amendment. Ammunition is not. We could regulate the sale of ammunition
but what about
far more than we do, which is
a backdoor assault on the Second Amendment, and it affects legal gun owners more than illegal gun owners.
What about the high capacity ammunition?
Right.
What about limiting the rounds?
These guys didn't in California. You can't have high capacity rounds. These guys didn't have high capacity rounds in their pockets.
I think all of the ammunition can be regulated far more than we do.
By regulated, you mean cut off, and that's if what we're talking about here.
But if you're a legal gun owner, what's the matter with
off legal gun sales and legal gun ownership? And that when you say, common sense gun control, what that means is either confiscating guns, because you're not going to fix this as long as 300 million guns are in circulation, or not have any more gun sales in this country whatsoever. If that's what you want, say what you want instead of talking around it with all of these backdoor stuff.
I think the problem is that legal gun owners have been able to hide under a shroud of this idea that somehow what they're doing and what they're involved in is completely separate from the violence that we see from illegal gun ownership. And the truth is that they are not. They are inextricably linked in this country.
Then you have to end legal gun ownership in this country.
And if you deal with the Second Amendment. Well, the first thing I'm saying is let's deal with the link. Maybe let's try to break the link between those two things.
So what you're going to have is anybody
I'm okay with reconsidering. I'm okay with reconsidering the idea of mass gun ownership.
And then
I don't think it's a great idea.
And then that's what you ought to say. I mean, if it's confiscating guns, if it's limiting gun ownership, then you're talking about the Second Amendment. And so stop talking about common sense.
But you can't paint me into that corner if I'm not talking about that.
We're not talking about that. As if it's simple little things we're going to do.
I think it's difficult to have a conversation about any kind of gun control when you say, well, if you are for some kind of reform, then you don't want guns at all. And I don't think that that's true.
Okay, Christy, tell me what reforms will work.
I just listed
Those aren't going to cut down on shootings. What they're going to do is punish legal gun owners and restrict access to ammunition.
Holding legal gun owners responsible for what happens to their guns?
All you're going to do is fill the jails with homeowners whose houses got broken into, et cetera, et cetera. That's not going to stop.
I'm not on either side here, but I'm going to list off a couple of things that I want you guys to both consider. So when we talk about certain things, what about people are talking about universal background checks, which people are around the country are in support of. Also, people are talking about restricting access to the people who are on the terrorist watch list and the no-fly zones. They're still allowed to legally buy guns in this country.
They absolutely are not. If you buy a gun in Michigan, you go through an extensive federal background check.
If you buy from a gun shop, but not if you buy at a gun show.
If you buy from a licensed dealer at a gun show,
but if I buy a gun from you, I don't go through any of that.
That's absolutely true.
Well, okay.
I mean,
you should not be able. Maybe you shouldn't be able to sell your gun to me. What's wrong with that? You should go to jail if you sell a gun to somebody. How about that?
Why in the world would you want to get in between a transaction between two legal citizens, law-abiding citizens?
Because that's part of the flow of guns from legal ownership to illegal ownership.
What if your dad wanted to leave his gun to you? What happens?
You shouldn't be able to do that.
You shouldn't be able to leave your gun to your son.
Not without some great big regulation. You can't leave anything. I mean, anything else that's regulated. Anything else that's regulated. I can't just give you my car.
You sure can.
Right? No, there has to be. There is a transaction that the state records. If I sell you my car, right? The title transfers. Why isn't that true for guns?
I mean, I guess we have a Second Amendment. If you want to do
okay,
if you want to do,
okay.
if you want to do
if
that,
the Second Amendment is just a
if you wanna do
free-for-all, then
that,
let's not have any
if you
debate
wanna
about
do,
it.
If you want to do that, and then you say that's going to stop this, I don't think it's going to stop this.
Sure, it
I
will.
think as long
It's
as you
part
have,
of- okay, well-
as long as you have guns in circulation, the people who misuse guns are going to find a way to get
But that kind of zero-sum argument then says, then let's talk about the Second Amendment. Then.
We have,
I mean,
Steve, we have layered and layered and layered gun laws on in this country.
Very
If we're
sloppy. Very sloppy.
This is the most
Patchwork.
regulated industry in the country.
Patchwork. It's a patchwork.
And
It's a
we've
total
layered on
patchwork.
and on and on, and the mass shootings haven't stopped.
Yeah, they haven't stopped because-
But gun violence on a whole in this country has declined remarkably over the last 25 years.
It depends on where you live. That's not true in
It
some
depends
place like
on the country as a whole. It's
doesn't-
down 40% in
if I live in
25 years.
If I live in Detroit, do you think gun violence is much lower than it was 25
So
years
is
ago?
the problem guns, or is there something else going on?
Okay, so
in
let's
combination of
ask
things.
about let's talk about this. Let's talk about where gun violence comes from. I mean, you just had doctors in Washington D.C. lobbying Congress, saying, "Why don't we get some kind of federal funding that we haven't had for the last 20 years to study the effects of gun violence?" The CDC wants this. Is that part of the equation? Could that be part of the solution?
I mean, it's
Of
all
course
part
it
of the
is.
solution. But I mean, how deep do you want to go? What amongst young gun buyers? What's the most popular gun? These AK-47s, because they look like the guns they shoot in their video games. So I mean, where do you go in terms of examining your culture?